What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Dispersing the Cloud. We are on episode 32. And so let me give you a recap of the week. So, recap of the week, I had a photo shoot last week in San Francisco where I was doing production work on it. We had Vinewood's Youth Night for the As You Are tour. I had a prison gig, so I actually got an acting gig. I know it's been a while since I've been in anything, but I did production work and did a little bit of acting for them over at the prison. Actually ran into my cousin at the prison too. Luckily he knew they were filming. He knew I didn't get arrested. The Well, on Friday we did, for the As You Are tour, we did one of our last shows and wrapped up in Stockton, which is pretty awesome. Restore Art and Graphics actually had it at their new building, which was great to be the first gig in there. They're still doing construction on it, so it wasn't all done, but still, it was awesome to be out there. I did some voiceover work for the museum project that we have going on right now with Zales Media, and I played at Liberty Towers. The process for this week, what I want to talk about is I did a count for my book total right now, and I've reviewed 52 books so far this year, counting the 2 books that I'm going to review today. So 50. And I wanted to kind of talk about like what I've learned over the course of 52 books. And I've talked about this a little bit in the other video blogs, but I've learned that everybody's saying the exact same thing. Whether they're white, whether they're black, whether they're rich, whether they're poor, whether they're an immigrant, whether they were born here, there seems to be a universal truth that everybody is talking about. And then even historically, they're talking about the same significant events as it relates to, let me close this, I'm always at 20% when I do these videos, I always have to close it out. When it relates to how they view business, like what significant events in business or in history affected business at certain times, is very, very interesting. So that's kind of what I've taken after. And then the other thing is the amount of time that it takes to go through this many books. This thing started because we wanted to answer the question, do CEOs make too much money, $400 million a year and such. The amount of time, and they claim to read 60 books a year, so I said I wanted to at least do that before I could give you an accurate assessment of whether or not CEOs are making too much. I would say just being halfway to 100, that was my goal, to try to make it to 100. I probably won't get to 100 this year. If I'm definitely going to hit 60, no problem, and I'll probably hit 70 or 80 books for the year. And I'll tell you right now, they make as much as they should make. Some of the universal truths that I find prevalent in all books is how money works. And once you understand how money works, getting money and using it properly equates to your long-term success. And I can see that from every book that I've gone through. I feel like there's an underlying truth in there. So I'll definitely keep talking about this stuff. If you guys have questions about some of the books that I've read, or you want books recommended to you, I got plenty that are just amazing. Anyway, let me jump into this week's book. The first one was Tribe by Sebastian Junger. Always say their last names wrong. You guys know that. This was a really interesting book about how in today's society we don't necessarily have the same atmosphere as a tribe would have, right? And so we're going to talk a lot about the Native American tribes that were here when we got here, and then talk about human nature. And so one of the questions that the book poses is, can we find a sense of belonging in our hedge-protected, closed-off society? And that sense of belonging that we actually long for as human beings, we don't necessarily get here in our society. One of the things, it's quoted later on, but I think it really relates to it, is in Western cultures, you'll find children having emotional connections to stuffed animals. And that comes from sleeping alone. Normally, if we were in a tribe, right, we'd have some type of hut where everybody slept together, and your son, your daughter, or whatever would sleep next to you, and they would equate comfort with that. In Western societies, we put our kids in cribs, and we leave them alone, and they develop emotional attachments to things, stuffed animals, blankets, pacifiers, all the above. I found that to be very interesting. And most of these are just quotes from my Twitter. You guys know that if you watch the show at all. Home is the place where when you have to go there, they have to take you in. Anybody who's gone away for college and come back, anybody who has like decent parents, when you go home, they take you in, regardless of where you've been. Regardless of what you've done or how bad of a situation is, they take you in when you go home. A lot of times for our communities, that's not necessarily true. This book talks a lot about PTSD and how when soldiers go away from war, they come back to sometimes, especially in Vietnam, a society that no longer wants them, which actually adds a lot to their post-traumatic stress. Humans do not mind hardship. In fact, they thrive on it. What they mind is not feeling necessary. This kind of plays into a little bit of what we just said. When you're not wanted at home, right? It really makes you feel like you're unnecessary, you're unwanted, and society has no use for you whatsoever. There's some very interesting studies that have been done on this, trying to figure out how to bring our soldiers home to a better spot. One of the things that they talked about in tribes, actually Indian tribes, where their soldiers and their chiefs were separate. So all their soldiers and their warriors would actually live separately than the rest of the community, because war is so ridiculously brutal. Like the mind state that you have to have during war and the mind state walking around the mall are so drastically different that they literally would separate their societies. They didn't have malls, but they kept their warriors separate. Another thing that kind of stood out to me in this book was during war times, the chief, right, would step down from power and the warlord would take over. And then when they came to negotiate peace, the warlord would relinquish power back to the chief, and the chief would negotiate the peace. So that was really interesting to me. Another dynamic that has to do with kind of like Western society and then the tribes kind of commingling or coexisting. This was a really interesting fact that you don't think about it. So in the 19th century, factories were being built in New York at the same time, just 1,000 miles away. Wars were being waged by Indian tribes, still using bows and arrows and hatchets. And those two worlds are coexisting at the exact same time. And sometimes in our history timeline, in our mind, we don't really equate those to be the same times, but they were. So modern day society, our modern day society creates a surplus of work. And this was some of the appeal for settlers to actually join the native lifestyle. So you have American society that's creating this work machine in New York, and you have people who are literally like, I think I'm going to go try to move in with the Indians because they kind of got this whole holistic lifestyle going on, minimal amount of work, right? Kind of like a little socialistic society of everybody kind of doing their part. So a lot of settlers chose to actually live with Native Americans. They actually told some stories about where the army would negotiate a release of people who had been captured, and those people who had been captured would get released, first be reluctant to even go back to society, and then be back in society and escape society and go back to the tribes because they had families there. They would take Indian brides, and they would enjoy that life. So this was interesting too. So statistically, as affluence and urbanization rises in society, rates of depression and suicide tend to go up. So again, we're talking about our human nature to need to belong to something, and then at the same time, what we think we want is isolation and our own space and our own things. But when we do have a community that we're very closely tied to, we tend to be more happy and more satisfied with our lives. Wealthy countries suffer depression as much as 8 times the rate that poor countries suffer. And that's a study done by the World Health Organization. Again, one of the guys I love to listen to is, oh my God, Ben Shapiro, and he always talks about suicide being a privilege of the rich. Poor people don't typically get depressed like rich people do. And I don't know if it is a community-based thing, like we're talking about tribes. And typically when you don't have a lot of cash, you tend to group together, right? So families will all live together under one roof, so you have more of a sense of a tribe or a community. But as you get more and more wealth, you tend to isolate. And again, increasing your workload, which gives you less human satisfaction and human connection. So those are pretty interesting statistics. Only the Western cultures you find children getting their security from stuffed animals. We already talked about that. An interesting thing about human connection. You don't owe... Oh, this was a great quote. So now we're going to get into a little bit of PTSD and a little bit of like tribism as patriotism, right? So there's an awesome quote. You don't owe your country nothing. This is a quote. I know it's not proper English. You don't owe your country nothing. You definitely owe it something, and in some cases, it may be your life. So if you equate the U.S. to a tribe, right? We're one tribal society. We've grouped ourselves in a United States, one front, right? We sure don't have tribes in the traditional sense. So that's how it's trying to show you a sense of tribe. If you had a tribe, you would gladly give your life for the tribe. So if you look at the country as a tribe, it would make sense that you would owe your tribe something, right? And let's see. You don't owe. This is back to suicide. When European countries go to war, suicide rates drop. When people are actively engaged in a cause, their lives have more purpose. That is actually talking about war. So one of the things that Switzerland does is all of their men go to war. All of their men are enlisted in the army. This does a couple different things. One, everybody knows how to use a gun, so there's less gun violence there, although everyone owns a gun. But there's safety. Everyone knows how to. No one's afraid of guns. It's like me. I grew up with guns, so guns don't scare me. I don't know. I've just always been around them. When I camp, I sleep with a gun underneath my pillow. When you know how to treat a gun with respect, it tends not to kill you because it can't. So that was pretty interesting. And then that actually goes to looking at how we view our soldiers. We would view our soldiers much differently if everybody was a soldier. Meaning if everybody had to serve. We would have less animosity. Even if we didn't agree with the war, the cause, we would understand that that was a service that they had to do, rather than something that they chose to do. A lot of people who do serve feel like they do choose to do it. I'll probably move so I don't. Judy's home. I'm doing a live broadcast. I'll move it though, because I'm talking about nerd stuff. How was your day?
That's good. Busy.
Busy is good. So next up is, let's see if I can get away with holding the camera the rest of the time here. Okay, so next up on it is when European countries go to war, suicide rates drop. We just talked about that. When people are actively engaged in a cause, they have more purpose. Oh, this was really interesting. So a lot of times disaster creates this sense of, makes me yellow, looks like yellow walls, man. Disaster creates a community that offers a lot more opportunity for people to actually get involved. They were talking about all right, I had to move back. I had bad signal. So they had bomb shelters, and people would actually go to the bomb shelters and stay there at night and then go to work in the morning and then come back at night. And a lot of people reported that that was actually really good for them. They missed it a little bit, actually. When the wartime was over, they kind of felt like they needed a purpose, something to kind of hold on to. This was interesting, the difference between male and female and our different roles in tribes. Male bystanders perform more than 90% of spontaneous rescues of strangers, and about 1 in 5 were killed in their attempts. And then, on the other hand, when it comes to moral sacrifice, women tend to lead men in this area, and the reference is the Holocaust. So when it comes to spontaneous acts of heroicism, it's probably the wrong word, of being heroic, men tend to have a little more testosterone, a little more drive, a little more thirst for doing things like that. But on the flip, when it comes to morality issues, as like the Holocaust, more women helped hide Jews and really stepped up in that area. And so the roles are distinguished kind of in this book, but they are interchangeable, meaning if there's no man, sometimes women step up, and if there's no woman, sometimes a man steps up. But that's not to say that we don't have very distinct instinctual roles that we play within our human tribes. War makes you an animal, and sometimes an animal equates humanity. A lot of the things that we do, that our soldiers do, has a lot to do with humanity, meaning those things that they do are part of our human nature, and we need to do a better job of understanding that and reacclimating them into our culture, back into society, so they can have smoother transitions. Part of the trauma that comes from war has to do with the reintegration into society. The best way to combat this would be to initiate a must-serve policy for all male citizens. This would strengthen the bond and the sense of tribe that we have, as well as giving an understanding to everybody else who has to serve. Josh is home. What up, man? Alright, I got 3 more and then I'm done. A society that doesn't distinguish between degrees of trauma can't expect its warriors to. So when someone comes home and they're airmen, compared to someone coming home and they are a sniper, they're going to need different levels of understanding and different levels of help from that society that they're trying to integrate back into. Murder and mayhem comes that's committed by someone who's rejected society's bonds and reflects with something the Navajo used to call skinwalkers. This was really cool. A skinwalker was someone who literally had no moral compass whatsoever, and they went crazy during war, and they would just go solo by themselves into the wilderness and just like kill random people and just cause terror. It's basically a form of PTSD. And it happens when a society doesn't integrate you back into it. Revering someone you share a combat outpost with is incredibly stupid. This was a really great quote from the book, because I feel like we do this as Democrats and Republicans. We share an outpost with each other, and so we really should get along, because when and if this country ever has to come together under some righteous cause of war, we will be at a serious disadvantage not respecting the other people that are around us. I am going to do the second book. I'm going to attempt to do it in my room, because I want to give Josh the kitchen of his house and make it not my recording studio right now. This man has to actually work. He doesn't get to hang out all day like me, so... I'm going to try to move in there. Hopefully we can get it done. He was being all quiet for me. Look, he's still shy. He's not saying nothing.
Right.
All right, we're back in action. Came into my car. All right, second book, American Buffalo. This was a really interesting book, and they kind of tied together the American Buffalo and Tribe. Heyo. Like trying to back up and find signal. Got it. Hopefully it holds here. Tribe is a 5-star book. Probably one of the most interesting books I've read this year. American Buffalo by Stephen Renelia. This kind of, they tied together. So the two books were really similar. One was obviously about tribes and a little bit of PTSD, but the cool thing about the Buffalo book was it had a lot of random facts about buffaloes, but at the same time it was talking about the same time period of were Indians and settlers and discovering America. So it was pretty interesting. Buffaloes were some of the largest, most plentiful mammals to ever walk the earth. There was like 32 million that lived in the Great Plains. We pretty much killed them all. So there was an explorer, his name was Elvira Nunez Cabela de Vaca. He is credited for seeing the first wild buffalo that's documented, and this was during his conquest to conquer Florida in 1527. It's a crazy story of them like going, like getting shipwrecked and then traveling all the way down I guess it would be our southern border, through like Texas and all the above, and all the run-ins they had with Native Americans. I think it was really interesting, good to jump back to Tribe, was Tribe wanted to be clear not to romanticize the Indian lifestyle, only because of the history of brutalness. Between, like, if you were in a tribe, you were all good, but between tribes, they were extremely brutal to each other. They would tie each other to trees using their own intestines while the person was alive, chop off all their fingers and skin them while they were alive if they got caught, like in different tribes. This was actually in American Buffalo as well. They were talking about if other tribes got caught hunting on their land. It's just incredibly gruesome and horrible things to do to another human being. So although the Indians did have the sense of nature down, and this sense of tribe, and this sense of community, their sense of humanity as a whole was freaking horrible. And they would do the most ungodly, like freaking just unspeakable things to other human beings. It's pretty ridiculous. And they're like nobody else, though. Every race, every religion has done those same things. So what I'm saying is the Indians were not secluded from the horribleness of human nature, although they did have some amazing things figured out as far as tribe and community. Oh, this was really interesting. Random fact from the book: isostatic rebound is actually the process where the Earth's crust expands after it's been relieved from the weight of large amounts of ice. So when you hear people talking about global warming and California is going to be underwater, just be like, no, because there was an ice age and we have isostatic rebound. So all the ice that was weighing down our continent, it takes like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years to actually get relief from that. So next time someone says that global warming is going to lead to a mass flood, just tell them no, it won't, because of isostatic rebound. It is a buffalo's hair. Oh, this was really interesting. So because the buffalo has like super close hair fibers, it actually gives it protection from the heat and the cold, and it can be in all different types of climates. In 1519, the horse was introduced to Mexico, and that was kind of like the beginning of the end of the buffalo. And then this was really interesting too. So remember we talked about settlers leaving their lifestyle in tribe, and they're going to the Indian lifestyle. Indians, settlers, foreigners, everybody alike would leave their families just to go hunt buffalo. Like literally just abandon their families just to be full-time buffalo hunters. People would set up shop and like literally just kill thousands of buffaloes for their skins because the skin trade was going so well. This was cool. Yellowstone Park, it takes about 9 hours for wolves to kill buffaloes, and out of 14 attempts, only about 4 result in a kill. Buffaloes are kind of docile out in the open because they had no natural predators. Wolves couldn't even take them out. So that was pretty interesting. Beaver fever, it's something you get from drinking contaminated water. I thought that was interesting because I got beaver fever when I was in the immigrant wilderness. Me and my brother both got it. These are just kind of interesting facts from the book. When you see an oil spill in movies, you're seeing crushed up bones mixed with vegetable oil. They used to use buffalo bones for those because buffalo bones were so plentiful. They talked about like in the plains, like being like 2 or 3 feet deep, just full of bones, just walking through bones. There's a picture of a 30-foot pile of bones with a man standing on top of it in New York City. Like just to give you an idea of how many buffalo were actually here. If you let buffalo meat sit in a frozen state, it made it tender. I just thought that was another interesting thing. I'm cooking a lot of wild game right now because Chad Mendez hooked it up with a whole bunch of meat. So I'm just interested in that. They used to dig this big hole and pack it with ice and then let the buffalo sit in there for like an entire year, and that would make it a little tender. That's pretty much that's all I had for American Buffalo. It wasn't as interesting as the book Tribe, but they both kind of fit together. I would say American Buffalo was like a 4-star book. Pretty interesting, but if you're not into hunting, if you're not into Western culture of like how the West was won, it's going to be boring to you because there's not a lot of scientific mind grenades in there, you know. My next book is Black Privilege by Charlemagne the God. He's actually fantastic. I'm almost done with the book because I already started reading it. I'll do another one, but I don't know what that other one will be. Coming up next week, we have more voiceover work. I'm setting up some potential dates for the new podcast in Fresno, setting up a book screening for Elizabeth Shar. We're going to do a pre-screening of her book, Piggins, so if you guys want in on that, let me know. It's going to be in the Calaveras County area. I got a show in Ukiah at a winery on Friday. I have a production gig in San Francisco on Saturday, and I'm playing some music at Liberty Towers on Sunday. Pretty full week. My thought of the day is going to go back to Tribe. When you meet someone who served, don't tell them thank you for your service. Spend some time talking to them about what they did, how they contributed, because that helps out a lot in their acclimation back to our society. That's all I got for you guys today. Thanks for watching. Make sure you follow me on Twitter if you want to see my notes throughout the week for the book that I'm reading. There's some great quotes on there already from Charlemagne the God, and I'll see you next week.